to another episode of the JODY Podcast.
I'm Joe.
And I'm Dee. And I'm sure that a lot of you guys watching, maybe at one point, you've watched like Love is Blind, Love Island, or maybe Married at First Sight. And a lot of times you'll see the people talking about how they're choosing that person. What are they looking for? You know, what qualities, what characteristics, what personality type? But one of the questions that has always kind of popped into my mind is how can you tell when a person is being picky versus they just have standards or maybe even preferences? Because I feel like sometimes if you have a preference or a standard, you kind of get a bad rap, almost like as if you're the reason you're single. So how can we distinguish or tell between when a person is truly being picky and standing in the way of their dating versus they just have standards and preferences and there's nothing wrong with that?
I think that's a hard question to answer. I feel like it varies for different people because some people, I feel like if it's not something that's going to make or break your relationship, then just let it go. Like it's if you hold on to it, I feel like you're being picky. But I also feel like what will make or break a relationship is different for different people.
Oh, for sure.
So a lot of people will try to do a blanket thing where it's like, oh, if it's this, that, and the third, then it shouldn't matter. But for what if for that person it does matter? Because there's a lot of factors that go into whether a relationship is harmonious, whether you're attracted to your partner, whether you guys can do lifelong term. So for example, some people will say things like lifestyle preferences don't matter. Yes, they do. When you have somebody who likes to be outdoorsy and the person they marry is constantly wanting to be inside, that can cause a lot of conflict. And it's not even meant to be that way. It's just one enjoys the outdoors and the other enjoys the indoors. And it's almost like they start to feel like you don't appreciate the things I appreciate and so on and so forth. Or it's hard for them to find a compromise or middle ground where both parties feel satisfied.
Yeah. And it's weird. On the one hand, I agree with you where I do feel like those lifestyle preferences are important. But then I also think about how in relationships, there's usually like a complementary nature where you guys kind of balance each other out. So I feel like there are extremes. Like there are certain levels of, you know, you're outdoorsy versus you want to stay inside that it just doesn't line up. Whereas with others, you kind of see that give and take where maybe the person who's outdoorsy learns to kind of stay inside a little bit more, and the person who's more introverted or a homebody actually gets outside more.
Obviously, Yona has not been watching Married at First Sight. Okay? If you watch Married at First Sight, okay, you will clearly see the experts say, you know, I think he could pull her out of that a little bit. She could pull him this and she could do this. What happens at the end? You know, are you going to stay married or get a divorce? We're going to get a divorce. And then on top of that, even when they stay married, fast forward to a year down the line? What did they do? A year? And then, yeah, we got a divorce. I think certain things can be helpful. So for example, a spender and a saver. I always say you can't have both in that relationship. You can't have two spenders. You can't have two savers. Because I think that it's going to be hard to balance on both sides, right? But let it be a situation where, like we said, the indoor, outdoor, even let's use health, right? If we're talking about people who value healthy choices or, you know, working out or things like that, and the other person is like, no, I just like to enjoy my life and work out once in a while, and I like to eat whatever I want. Over time, it's almost like they start judging each other or they start resenting the other for feeling judged. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying it's impossible. I do think what you're saying is possible. But at the same time, I see it fall apart more than it stays together because most people nowadays don't want to compromise.
Well, I mean, I agree on the compromise part. I was more so saying, I don't know if maybe this is a values thing. Like maybe we're talking about how it's important to have the same values.
Agree.
And
Yeah.
that is okay to have a standard. That's not
Yes.
being picky.
Right.
I was more so saying in healthy relationships, going back to what you said, it's important to have balance, but I guess I'm trying to figure out, where do we draw the line? So for example, I agree. I don't think it's good to have a couple who are vastly different from each other, but I also think that some pairings you can both learn from each other. I'm not sure what all of those qualities are necessarily. But I do agree with what you said about the compromising. But how do you know what you should be compromising on versus what you shouldn't? Because I think sometimes a mistake that we make is maybe there are things we should be compromising on that we don't, and then things that we shouldn't, we do.
I mean, I think that goes back to the values that you said, though, because to me, values are not things that you compromise. Values to me should be stable and consistent. And if you're entering into a relationship, I think it's very important to have shared values.
I agree.
Usually what I see is if people go against or live against their values, they're usually miserable.
Yeah.
They're frustrated. They're constantly living with a sense of guilt or a sense of, I'm not doing or accomplishing what I'm supposed to be doing or accomplishing. They feel like there's a disconnect, and they feel like, is life worth living? So for me, values, we don't compromise. But when it comes to lifestyle, sometimes is a value. And I think that's what people underestimate. So if somebody's lifestyle involves the great outdoors, or their lifestyle involves making healthy choices, a lot of people underestimate how that can impact the home. I'm not saying it's impossible, because I do know people who they've been able to manage where they're not judging their partner, even though they have different lifestyle preferences, but it's very rare. Most of the time, people are either judging or wanting the partner to come closer to their side. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that either. I do think, like you said, they can kind of learn from one another. But I do think it requires a lot of, what's the word? Like it has to be somebody that's not easily offended. If you're someone that's easily offended, it is not going to work. And a lot of people think they're not easily offended, but they are easily offended.
Okay.
So I don't know. Maybe we should take a poll. We should take a poll.
Right.
And see what you guys think in the comments or whatever it is. But I've seen it so much where people almost think because you don't accept their lifestyle choice, it's an insult. And I'm like, no, it's a different preference. So for me, that's something that I think it's okay. I think it's a preference or a standard.
Gotcha. Okay. So where would you draw the line where you feel like, all right, now you're just being too picky? Like, what would you say are the things that when you first hear it, you're just like, come on now?
So saying that you don't like the way somebody dresses, like their style.
Okay.
I feel like that's something that can be worked on unless a person is very tied to their style. Because some people, their style, it's like, this is my way to express myself. But if somebody is just not interested and they just put a lot of stuff together and that's why you're feeling, oh, I don't like your style, that person is probably open to learning a different way or doing something differently. So I don't think the way someone dresses is enough to say, okay, I'm not dating that person.
Now, what if the person said they got the ick?
From how they dress?
Just from how they dress. They took one look at them, saw their outfit, and was like, ick.
Well, I don't encourage anybody dating if they've gotten the ick. That's just my personal thing. Because to me, the ick, I think they think it's about the clothes. I actually don't think it's about the clothes. I think if you got to the point of the ick, it's something else. Okay. Or it's mixed. Like it's almost like there's an interaction between the clothes and something else. But I don't think clothes are enough to give you the ick.
Okay. But yeah, no, I've heard some strange things. Like, true story, I heard a woman say, he wore socks and sandals. I got the ick. So that's why I asked.
Well, I guess that's her preference.
But I think it's important to kind of identify where do we draw the line? Because on the one hand, if for those of us who are watching, you're single and you want to be in a relationship, it is important to figure out, are these things shallow or superficial things that I'm making non-negotiables? Or are they things that actually matter and will impact your future marriage relationship? So going back to what you said about values, I would add beliefs to that. Like sometimes people think, oh, we don't have to necessarily see the world exactly the same way, and you don't. But I do think you at least need to be looking in the same direction so that you guys can make it work. Versus sometimes I think we think love is enough and it'll just cover and make everything better. And that doesn't always work, unfortunately.
Right. I agree. And I think it's hard. Like I said, it's a tougher conversation just simply because. So, for example, for someone, they might say, looks don't matter to me. It's about personality. And if for that person it's true, then to me, if they see somebody and they feel like something's not right about the way that they look, then I feel like, okay, if looks don't matter to you, then maybe you're just being picky about something. But there are some people who looks do matter.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people will make them feel bad for saying, oh, you should marry for the heart, or, it shouldn't be this and this and that. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't, but I do think it's very important to be attracted to your spouse.
Oh, for sure.
It's important. If you don't and it doesn't mean that everyone will think your spouse is attracted, but are you attracted to your spouse? Yeah. Because if you don't find your spouse attractive, that opens the door to so many things. And even before those things surface, some people don't realize it, but when you're not attracted, sometimes you don't even treat that person the way that you should.
Yes.
It's not right, because there's somebody out there that would give that person the world, and you're robbing them of that experience because you don't have that attraction to them.
Yeah. It's funny when you said that, the thing that came to mind was Pretty Privilege, where they talk about how being attractive affects the way that people treat you. If you're in a relationship with someone whom you're not attracted to, it's almost like there's this undercurrent of seeing them as less than you, like they're inferior or like you could do better. And that affects the way that you treat them. So I would kind of agree with what you're saying. Attractiveness matters. And especially if you're Christian and the goal is to get married and stay married, the attraction plays into that.
Right. And I do think you can grow in attraction. I don't think that it's always something that's there at the outset, but I do think you can grow in it. And if you're one of the people that can grow in it, even if you don't feel it at first, you can give it a shot and see, do we grow in that? And I think that's fine. But like I said, everybody's different. A lot of men struggle to grow in attraction. So usually, for guys, I say, hey, unless God opens your eyes to see this person in a different way, don't just sit there kind of pushing, knowing I don't feel any attraction to this girl. Because then when it's in the marriage relationship, what I've seen, not from myself, obviously, but from other people, is that sometimes guys even question whether they should have married this person, or they don't give it the same level of effort that they would have given if it was someone that they were attracted to, because men are very visual. So for me, and I think women, we have to be okay with this too. So both men and women is being okay with, I'm not going to be that person for everyone. Like, I'm not always going to be attractive to everyone. Everybody's not going to want to date or be with me. And that's okay. Like, everybody's not meant to be attracted to everybody.
Yeah.
So I think that plays a huge part of it.
Okay. So in this case, attractiveness, it doesn't fall under your being picky. This is actually where it's okay to have preferences or standards.
I think, let me clarify just to make sure. So I do think you should be attracted to that person. I don't know I feel like being picky about what you're attracted to, I feel like that can be picky. Okay. So some people will be like, oh, I only date, I don't know, like Asians, white people, black people, Hispanics, Latinos. To me, that's being picky. You actually don't know who you're attracted to until you have that interaction. And you intermix with them and you vibe with them and you see how you feel. So for me, I do think you should be attracted, but I feel like be open because you might be attracted to something you did not think you were attracted to.
Yeah.
And sometimes I've heard stories like that where people are like, the person I married was not at all my type,
Right.
but it ended up being the person that they were ultimately attracted to.
Yeah. I think sometimes, and this is a silly example, but it's what came to mind when you were speaking. It reminds me of when you're a kid and you look at something and you're just like, I don't want that. You have not taken the time to figure out what is it made out of. You just look at it and decide, nope, that's it, I'm good.
Right.
Versus recognizing sometimes you can end up trying something and recognizing, oh, wow, I didn't think I would like that, but I actually do.
Right.
And I think that's why it's important for us to date against or outside of our type.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like you get stuck in this cycle.
Yeah.
And even though none of those relationships have worked out, you're still going for the same kind of person, whether it's a physical type or an emotional type.
Right, right. And I think that's where the pickiness starts, because if you would be open to, a variety of options, I think that would help tremendously, because sometimes the reason why you're not finding what you're looking for is because you keep going for the same thing. It's one of those things like what you said. Sometimes if you try something new, you'll find out, oh, I like this. And sometimes like food as well, it's an acquired taste. So when you first meet the person, you may not necessarily feel like you're vibing like that. But after a couple of interactions, and this has happened to me, you're like, actually, I could see this panning out, or I could see this working. So I've been in situations where I felt like as if I was instantly attracted to somebody I saw. Other times I feel like I was not initially attracted, but I got to know them, and then I started building an attraction. Other times too, it was friendships, and I'm not even really thinking it could get there, but then, okay, it did get there. So I feel like being open to what that attractiveness looks like is good.
Yeah.
But if you're only looking at, like, I only date people like this with this color hair and this color eyes and this, like, to me, that's being picky.
Okay. I would actually agree with that. And I think sometimes too, we get it wrong because we're so focused on the romance side, we don't focus on the friendship.
Right.
And sometimes it's that friendship that can help the attraction to grow.
Right. I agree. I agree. Christianity too helps attraction to grow. I don't know if a lot of Christian women have had this experience, but sometimes you may not initially be attracted to a guy, or maybe he just kind of falls, like a little lower than what you typically go for. But you see the way that he serves the Lord, and it raises that for you. It's like the attractiveness level goes up simply because of the way that he's moving. And not just in terms of being a Christian, but how he moves with other people. Because as we say, you're always thinking the cross. So we're thinking about the vertical relationship, but we're also thinking about the horizontal. So for me, when I see a guy who not only loves God, but you can see that he loves God by the way that he treats people, that is very attractive. And I think that sometimes if you're being too picky, you could miss out on, a really great person, because the Bible says beauty fades, and it's a matter of understanding.
Facts.
At the end of the day, can you really live or be friends with the person that you chose?
Yeah. No, the friendship has to be the foundation, because not only beauty fades, you don't know where your life is going to take you.
That's true too.
There are so many people who chose someone, whether dating or even marrying someone, because they were attractive, they were 6'4", they were making 7 figures or whatever it was. And then when tough times come, where are they at?
Yeah.
So
It's a big deal.
sometimes, yeah. So sometimes in our looking, kind of like what the prophet Samuel did when he met Jesse's sons. So in the Bible, God sent Samuel to anoint the next king of Israel. And then the Bible tells us that when Samuel saw Jesse's son, I think it was Eliab, he was like, wow, yeah, this has got to be him. And then God was like, hold up a minute. I don't look the way man does. Man looks at the outside appearance. I look at the heart.
Right.
So I think when it comes to distinguishing between, is this a standard, a preference, or am I being overly picky, we also have to ask, from a godly perspective. What is this? Is what I'm doing going to make me choose someone based on characteristics that don't last or that don't truly matter in the long run? Or are they based on things that will actually stand the test of time, stand through sickness, stand through financial problems, and so on and so forth? Because sometimes we're so focused on what we see that we miss out on the important things that are not easily seen with our eyes.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think I don't want, people to come off thinking, oh, well, you can't have this and you can't have that. No, I do think it's important to know certain things, but I just think it's about that whole discernment thing of knowing what matters and what doesn't. Number one, I would say, what God thinks or says, matters.
Yeah.
And I think it's okay to also have certain things that guide you. So for some people, it's like culture. And I'm not going to lie. Sometimes I'll think to myself, man, it's just, I would love someone who could also speak my language. However, that is a preference. So if God says, okay, you're going to marry someone who does not know the language, that is something I can forego. Sometimes it might even be related to family. Family, I feel like, is very tricky because you have some really good people that sometimes comes out of messed up families.
Yeah,
and we all
that's
have,
true.
we all have our baggage here and there. So for me, the important thing is determining whether this is God's will or not, because that person may have come out of, a family that was broken, like a broken home, or have dealt with a lot of different things. But if God uses that as part of their story, this is still somebody you can connect with. Think of people in the Bible like Moses, like Joseph, things that fell apart, families, because Moses wasn't even raised with his family.
Right.
Yes, he tried, he still chose to suffer with the people of Israel, but he still was raised, in the palace, And then you have Joseph, who was separated from his family early on because his brothers were jealous of him. These are all things parents might tell you, this is a red flag, like don't, get with this person, or they come from a bad family or whatever it might be. But sometimes God allows certain circumstances to get us to a certain place. So I feel like you can prefer someone who comes from an intact family unit. But I also say be open and pray, because even if the person comes from a dysfunctional family dynamic, could it be that God still has that person in mind for you? And maybe there's something about you that could be healing for that individual and vice versa. So I think it's just a matter of God ultimately determines it, and that will help us distinguish between the standards and the preferences.
Yeah.
But I feel like as if we really have to make sure we're not so picky that we're not open. Even if God were to send this to us, we wouldn't even recognize it because the pickiness has already ruled them out of the list.
Yeah. And it's so funny when you were describing that. Y'all, please don't quote me on this because I watched the video a long time ago. But I promise you, I watched an interview with Priscilla Shirer and her husband, Jerry. And if I remember correctly, while Priscilla came from an intact home, mom and dad, I believe her husband was raised in a house with just his mom. But by proxy of him being raised in a house with just his mom, and I don't remember if he had siblings or not, he learned to do a lot of things that the average guy wouldn't learn. So he learned to cook, he learned to clean, he learned to do the laundry and do all of these different things. So what ended up happening in his marriage to Priscilla is, with all of her teaching ministry, she was constantly out traveling, doing different things. So who ended up being the one doing a lot of what would typically be considered, oh, that's what the mom should do? It was him.
Yep.
And that actually came out of his own background.
Yep.
So we can understand, people say, oh, well, you should go for this and you should go for that. But also remember, when God is in it, he changes the circumstance. He changes the situation. So even if that person's background may not be perfect, according to your standards or our standards, if God is in it, he can turn it around, because remember what the Bible says, he works all things out for our good.
Yeah. And I think if people keep that in mind, they'll be a lot more open to what God has to offer.
Yeah.
And that does not mean that God's going to give you some unattractive person that you don't like, and that's the person that's going to be your spouse. I actually think God cares. I think God gives us our preferences and our, like what we're attracted to most of the time. I think it's just sometimes we are unaware of what we're attracted to. It's almost like you only ever ate vanilla ice cream, so you don't realize, I like chocolate ice cream too. Mm-hmm. So I think it's just widening that palette so that when God presents what you need in front of you, you actually give it a shot so you can recognize, I'm attracted to this, or I like this. But I do think God cares. I don't think God is going to give you somebody that you feel, ugh, when you see them or you think about them. I genuinely think God has curated somebody who is perfect for you. And he knows that when the time is right, he's going to bring the two of you together. So I think the most important thing is keeping God at the top and making sure that no matter what decision you make, he is the one that's at the head or in charge and is guiding you in your decision making.
I agree. And when you were sharing that story, it reminded me a few months ago, I was actually having that struggle where I was kind of like, is God going to give me what I need, but not give me what I want? Like, is he just going to ignore that and disregard it and say, I know better? Like, I legit was having that conversation with God. And then I went to go pick up my little cousin from school. And then I always like to ask her, are you hungry? Did you want to get something to eat? And she said, I want Chick-fil-A. Oh, wait, it's closed. I said, it's closed? What do you mean? She said, it's closed for renovations. I said, oh, I didn't know that. She said, yeah, so you can just go to McDonald's. I said, but what did you want? Chick-fil-A or McDonald's? She said, I wanted Chick-fil-A, but it's closed for renovations. I said, okay. So then I get back on the highway. She said, where are you going? I said, we're going to the nearest Chick-fil-A. It was like, I want to say 6 miles away. Mm-hmm. You don't have to do that. I said, it's okay. And I keep driving. She says, no, but I don't need it. I just wanted it. And I said to her, I want you to learn something. When you love someone, you don't just want them to have what they need. You want them to have what they want. Y'all, I felt like I preached to myself in that lesson when I said that to her. And then she just looked at me and she said, thank you. Right. And then in my heart, I said, thank you to God, because I felt like
he answered the prayer. He
used that to answer the conversation I was having.
Yep.
So we want you guys to know, yes, we're saying don't be picky. Think about those characteristics, standards, and traits that not only are godly, but also that will last. But also remember, God cares about what you want, and he's going to give you someone that fits into that.
Yes, God cares about our wants and our needs.
Amen.
So trust him to do the picking and stop being picky. No, I'm kidding. Well, thank you guys for tuning in. If you have not already, like, comment, subscribe, send us your questions. And seriously, do the poll. I don't know who's going to set it up, but somebody find out a poll.
Probably Ken behind
We
the
need
scenes.
to figure out picky versus a preference. You should actually just list a bunch of qualities and then you just like pick picky.
Yes,
or
I like the sound of
preference
that.
or
That'll be
standard or
cool
whatever
to
it
see the
is.
results.
Yeah.
And then we might talk about it on a clip or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. But thank you for tuning in again. And you guys enjoy the rest of your evening.
All right. Bye.